And then I'll get so excited about something that the excitement overwhelms me, and I just am in love with everything.
Well, I'm not a poet. I'm just a woman.
I want to go where culture is, like New York, or at least Connecticut or New Hampshire, where writers live in the woods.
Get into those schools anyway.
Do you ever wonder how, what story you're going to be in somebody else's life? You ever think about that?
Ladybirds and gentlemen, nights and weekends, little women of all ages, and everyone else. Welcome to Glimpsing Greta, a Greta Gerwig movie podcast. I'm your host, Jay. Am I nautically sensual? Usually this is where I would introduce my co-host, John, but I'm once again recording solo this week. Things get a little bit hectic over the holidays, but I wanted to make sure to still get an episode out this week. And yeah, today we are going to be talking about the 2013 Noah Baumbach and Greta Gerwig film, Frances Ha. So let's just dive right in here. This is directed by Noah Baumbach and written by Baumbach and Greta Gerwig. And it stars Gerwig along with Mickey Sumner, Adam Driver, Michael Zegan, Patrick Heisinger, and others. This is actually a bit of a milestone for a few of these people. It's Adam Driver's fourth ever film role. He's most well known for playing Kylo Ren in the Star Wars series, but he also has played characters in BlacKkKlansman and Annette, and actually quite a few Noah Baumbach films. This is his first of 5 features he did alongside Noah Baumbach. Of course, his most iconic being his performance in Marriage Story. And yeah, this is also Greta Gerwig's second film with Baumbach after a small but important from a contextual perspective role in his film Greenberg. And this is her 4th film as a writer, so she's kind of gotten her feet a little bit. And yeah, we have cinematography here by Sam Levy, who is a frequent collaborator with both Gerwig and Baumbach. He also worked on Mistress America and Lady Bird, which are 2 movies that, not to spoil anything, but we will probably be talking about on this podcast. And this film, Frances Ha, premiered September 1st, 2011 at the Telluride International Film Festival. And it also screened at the Toronto International Film Festival a few days later on September 7th. And after that, it was acquired for distribution by IFC Films, who released it theatrically on May 17, 2013. And then later in the year, it was released on Blu-ray and DVD by the Criterion Collection. And that's actually how I watched it, the Criterion Collection version, the Blu-ray specifically. And yeah, it was very well received by critics. In particular, they praised the writing and Gerwig's performance, and she was actually nominated for several acting awards, including the Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Comedy, Independent Spirit Award, and the British Independent Film Award, among others. So a little bit of context about this. This is Gerwig's second film chronologically that we are talking about here. We took a little bit of a digression to talk about her newest film with Noah Baumbach, which is White Noise. But yeah, before this we talked about Nights and Weekends, which was her directorial debut and the second feature she had written. But in the time since then, she's kind of started to get big on the indie scene, starring in quite a few movies across various genres. And she and Noah Baumbach met on the set of Greenberg, which Noah Baumbach was directing, and they got along well enough that they decided to make this film together. And it was the start of both their personal and professional relationships. They are partners both creatively and professionally. And yeah, it kind of, Frances Ha represents a fusion of Gerwig's sort of mumblecore roots with Baumbach's more mainstream indie style. It's kind of an evolution of the mumblecore movement, which we talked about a lot in Nights and Weekends. That's sort of this very authentic but very improvisational, very sort of stripped down aesthetics, very cheap filmmaking. And Frances Ha is sort of a little bit more refined, but it still has that sort of personal authenticity here. So the story follows Frances Halliday, a 27-year-old dancer who is living in New York, as she sort of drifts from place to place, sort of looking for her place in the world and trying to figure out what she wants from her life. And yeah, to give my brief sort of spoiler-free review, this is a very spectacular film that very much deserves its high reputation. Gerwig and Baumbach sort of capture this authenticity of being a 20-something and trying to find your place in the world. And I think it's a somewhat universal experience. I think a lot of people will be able to relate here. So yeah, I thought it was just spectacular, and the empathy it has for Frances, the main character, in its portrayal of her, I thought was really quite phenomenal. And I imagine I will be revisiting this quite often. It's one that I'm looking forward to watching with other people. But yeah, that's kind of my spoiler-free thoughts. We're going to dive a bit deeper into it now with some spoilers, but I'd encourage you, if you haven't seen it, to go and watch it. It isn't a film with a traditional story structure. The story is very much more so composed of scenes and moments than it is of sort of big plot movements. But yeah, we start with our protagonist, Frances Halliday, who she's 27 years old. She has graduated from college, but is still kind of trying to figure out what she wants to do with her life. She's currently working as a dancer and living in New York with her best friend Sophie, and she works at this dance company. She teaches lessons, and she's also an understudy. And she, at the beginning of the movie, we see her ending this relationship that she's had with this man, and find out that she's kind of like struggling to make ends meet a little bit, but she's sort of found a rhythm to her life here. But then her best friend Sophie, who they have an apartment together, decides one day to move in with a different friend, which leaves Frances to try and figure out where to live. And at first she moves in with Lev, who's the son of a wealthy man. We never really find out what he does, but Lev is sort of this artist living in the city, but he also has a lot of sort of funds for that through his father. And Lev has a housemate, Benji. Frances finds Lev really charming, but he's constantly bringing home other girls, and it's very clear that he's sort of looking for this sort of freedom, and he doesn't want to be tied down in a romantic relationship, unlike Frances, who's kind of longing for that connection. But she and Benji actually start spending more time together and hit it off a bit. But then she loses out on a major gig at her dance company, and she isn't going to be able to afford the rent there anymore. And she also gets into a big fight with Sophie, so she decides to go visit her parents in Sacramento for Christmas, and that sort of resets her. And when she comes back to New York, she crashes with a dancer from her company. They don't really get along. The dancer is maybe a little put off by Frances's sort of bubbly spontaneity. So, but they live together for a time. We don't really know how long, But at a dinner party, Frances finds out that Sophie and her boyfriend are going to be moving to Tokyo, and she's upset, so she makes an impulsive trip to Paris. And then when she returns, she gets a job as a summer RA at her alma mater, and while working at a dinner there, she runs into Sophie, who is back in New York attending a funeral. Sophie drinks way too much and gets into a fight with her boyfriend, who's now her fiance, and she decides to stay the night with Frances and reveals that her life in Tokyo has been very miserable, and she's actually suffered a miscarriage and is just missing her life in New York with Frances. But things kind of go back to the way they were. Frances returns to New York and now gets a job working at the offices of her dance company, and she choreographs on the side as well. And this is kind of a turning point for both characters. And when Frances returns to New York, she actually gets a job working in the offices of her dance company, and she also choreographs a bit on the side. And one night, all of her friends from throughout the movie show up to her recital, and she reconciles with both Sophie and Benji. She moves into her own apartment finally, and her name is too big for the mailbox, so she folds it, and it reads Frances Ha. So where the title of the movie is, that's where it ends. So as you can kind of tell, there isn't an overarching narrative here. It's just kind of like a collection of scenes that lets us get to know these characters, and especially Frances. It is, though, an evolution of the mumblecore genre. There's a bit more of a form to this than there was to Nights and Weekends. And yeah, it's just a great look at the lives of listless 20-somethings. And I'm guessing a lot of people will be able to relate to aspects of Frances's situation. I know I was able to relate to certain things in this movie. And I just love the narrative device here, that each chapter is titled with the address she's currently living at. And it makes it clear just how much she's drifting from place to place and looking for somewhere to settle down. And there is that sort of, when she finally gets her own apartment, there's a bit of a catharsis there. And I do think, though, that catharsis is both a pro and a con, because Frances gets everything she needs to start the next chapter of her life, and we leave her sort of feeling the sense of she's going to be okay, which was somewhat in question throughout the rest of the movie, if she would be able to pull herself together and get all of these things in a row and find her purpose. And at the end, she kind of has, or at least is on the path to doing that. But at the same time, I think the ending is a little bit tidy. Like, everything falls into place very quickly, and a lot of it falls into place in ways we don't really quite see. But again, I do like that it gives us the catharsis of knowing she will be okay. So yeah, overall I gave the story a 4 out of 5. Where I think it really excels, though, is in the characters. Frances might be one of the best protagonists I've ever seen. She's spontaneous, emotionally open, and optimistic to a fault, but also a little bit melancholy and a little bit unsure of her place. And she just kind of drifts from place to place, but she always lands on her feet, which makes her a really compelling character. And there's little touches here, like she's struggling to make ends meet, but is also impulsive enough that she's constantly getting in her own way. She has big spontaneous purchases and trips to try and make herself feel better when she's down. And occasionally it works, like when she goes to Sacramento, and occasionally it doesn't, like when she goes to Paris. And she gets along with people who understand her and are able to meet her at her level, But things get really awkward when she moves outside of her social circle. So there's a dinner party sort of in the last half of the movie that the awkwardness is just so apparent in every line that she's not picking up on the social cues that she needs to be picking up on to participate in this conversation in the way she wants to. But then all of these things, all of these various little quirks and flaws, the film never judges her for them. And I feel like usually in movies when we see women like Frances, they're depicted as either immature or a floozy or someone that the men in the movie fall in love with but then later have to grow beyond. But since this film is centered on Frances, she gets to be a full character, and she's portrayed with such empathy. And I think a lot of that has to do with Greta Gerwig's writing. She brings this sort of warmth and empathy and love to this character. And Gerwig's performance as well. There isn't a lot of hatred or animosity or even like subconscious hatred or fear of anything. Frances is just kind of a normal 20-something who's trying to find her place in the world and learn how to be a responsible adult, but also tried to find a way to do that while being true to her own desires and passions and goals and artistry. And I do wonder how much of this is sort of Gerwig putting elements of herself into this character. It is actually her real-life parents who play Frances's parents in this film, so I think there might be an element of autobiography here. But I don't want to speculate too much. And yeah, I think these elements really go in a long way to making Frances a relatable character. And I feel like the term relatable gets overused to a certain extent, but it just fits for Frances. She's very specific, and yet her situation is universal enough that I think a lot of people are going to understand what she's doing and what she's feeling at a lot of given moments. So, while this film is ultimately about Frances, it is also about the relationship between Frances and Sophie. That's where we start and that's where we end. And it's complex in ways we don't really see at first. Sophie kind of starts out as a person who feeds Frances's energy. So when they fall out, it's really devastating to both of them. And I think there's a sense of like, Frances thinks of Sophie as being just like her, which leads Frances to misunderstand a lot of Sophie's wants and desires. And I think Sophie feels a little bit stifled by Frances at the beginning of the film, but also they do understand each other on this deeper level, even if there's the occasional misalignment there. And I do think Sophie moving out in the beginning wasn't just about her excuse of wanting to find the perfect home. I think she does want to have some space away from Frances. But in the end, they're still such good friends that they overcome this. And it's really nice to see that happen in a movie. It's really cathartic. And it lets you know that Frances will be okay. So next up we have Lev, who is played by Adam Driver and is ridiculously charming and also ridiculously lacking in self-awareness. He acts like a rich kid on Rumspringa. He's sort of hedonistic and just sort of trying to experience as much as he can here. And he has all of these passions and all of these desires and all of these things just kind of wrapped up. But he's also not emotionally intelligent enough to see how he's affecting the people around him. And Frances is initially attracted to him, but I think she's right in not trying to pursue him because he's not the type of person she needs in her life. At that point, he needs to do as much growing as she does, but he doesn't necessarily understand that he needs to do that growth. But because he's played by Adam Driver, he's also very charming and charismatic, so it's hard not to root for him a little bit. And Benji is a real sweetheart. It took me a bit, but I did eventually come around to how he playfully ribs with Francis. At first it seems a little bit mean, but then once Francis kind of starts participating, you get the sense that they start feeling as natural together as Francis and Sophie do. And they don't really have a traditional romance in this movie, but there is that sort of romantic undertone to the relationship. So yeah, when he and Francis sort of make up at the end of the movie, it feels very cathartic again. And I also wanted to talk about Colleen, who's the leader of the dance company that Francis is a part of. And she's very clearly overworked, but she still looks out for Francis as much as she can. And she's a phenomenal leader because she knows that Francis isn't good enough to make a career out of dancing, but also knows not to tell her that directly because she doesn't want to crush Francis's spirit. So she finds other things for Francis to do, mainly working at the office and then also doing choreography, which is something that Francis is actually good at. And the dance she choreographs at the end actually really does feel like something special. Like they put in the effort to make sure, even though this is a movie, to make the dance feel like something impressive. And then the final character I wanted to talk about is Patch. He's the boyfriend of Sophie, and I agree with Francis that he's pretty terrible, but he's terrible in a way that works with the film's ideas and what it's going for and the story it's telling. And I do kind of hope someone better comes into Sophie's life by the end, because he's... oh boy. But yeah, overall I gave the characters a 5 out of 5, just stellar across the board. Everyone serves a purpose within the story and has their place. So next up we have the visuals, and I was just blown out of the water by how good these visuals are. It has a lot of those mumblecore aesthetics, but they're refined in a way that looks spectacular. Like, they use cheap cameras, but they were very intentional about things like blocking and costuming and lighting. The lighting here just looks absolutely stunning. And the movie is in black and white, and the black and white looks gorgeous. The cinematographer, I was watching a featurette on this, took great pains to make the digital cinematography look as good as possible. And it's very reminiscent of classic films from the French New Wave. I'm not really an expert in that, but I have seen a handful of French New Wave films, so I could sort of pick up on, like, they're going for this very specific aesthetic and they're hitting it exactly. And it looks better even than something like David Fincher's recent film Mank, which came out, had better cameras and more money behind it. But Frances Ha just looks spectacular in every way. The lighting and the post-production even just make everything look so good and so filmic. And yeah, the cheaper cameras and the sort of laid-back aesthetic actually allows them to go a bit all out on the location filmmaking. They film in New York, Sacramento, and Paris. And again, the black and white looks so good that all of those locations look incredible. I think Paris and New York look a bit better than Sacramento. Sacramento kind of seems like the type of place that you need a little bit of color to make it pop, but even still, like, just so good across the board. So yeah, I gave the visuals a 4.5 out of 5. Spectacular. You can tell they put a lot of effort and a lot of thought into this. This isn't the mumblecore of Nights and Weekends where it's improvisational. Everything here is blocked and lit in a way that tells you that there's intentionality and thought going into what it means. Next up, we have the performances. First is Greta Gerwig, who is phenomenal. This might be the comedic performance of the decade. She hits every note perfectly. And again, as I said before, her empathy for this character shines through in every way. And this isn't a mean-spirited performance. It's a very honest and open performance. And yeah, I think she just absolutely knocked it out of the park. Mickey Sumner as Sophie goes toe-to-toe with Gerwig and really finds a good chemistry, and they have this great chemistry together, and you understand their friendship without needing to see it play out. And she's also very good at not overplaying being drunk, which I thought was a good touch. Adam Driver, as I said before, he is incredibly charming. Like, so good. If you've only ever seen him in Star Wars, you're missing out. He's such a good actor, and he has such range, and here he's just turned that charm up to the max, and it works perfectly for the character. Then we have Michael Zegan, who plays Benji, and he's also charming, but in a very different way. And I love his chemistry with Gerwig. They have this sort of natural rapport that goes on in this sort of back and forth, a bit of a playful ribbing that really works out the longer they spend on screen together. And then I also did want to shout out Charlotte Dombrose, who plays the leader of the dance company, and just a really great supporting performance. She sells every moment and the kindness underneath the surface of this character. So yeah, overall I gave the performances 4.5 out of 5. Stellar across the board. Just really great. And then last up we have the music. Now, here the songs are mostly pre-existing. They use some pop songs, some other sort of instrumental songs, and the song choices are very good. They're very intentional about sort of finding this classic feel for the movie, that it feels a bit timeless, even though very specifically being set in the early 2010s. But yeah, I mean, I can't really give them a ton of credit for making the music because they didn't make the music, but I will give them a bit of credit for choosing the music. So they have songs like David Bowie's Modern Love that plays over a very specific scene that's actually a reference to a scene from the French New Wave where Gerwig just kind of dances along the streets, and it's a great scene. And the music just kind of adds this energy to it. So yeah, I gave the music a 4 out of 5, which leaves the overall score for this a 22 out of 25, which is a 4.4 out of 5, or an 88%. So yeah, currently the highest of the Greta Gerwig movies that I've seen so far for this podcast. And yeah, just an absolutely spectacular film that is really worth checking out, especially if you yourself are sort of a 20-something trying to find your place in life. I think elements of this are really going to resonate. Yeah, I was very happy. This is one I had never seen before, so I was very happy to watch it for this podcast and happy to talk about it with you all. So on that note, thank you everyone for listening. Make sure to follow us on social media. We are Binging Barbie Podcast on Instagram, at Binging Barbie on Twitter, and Binging Barbie, a Barbie movie podcast on Letterboxd. There you can find an up-to-date list of all of our rankings. And we will be back next week with our regularly scheduled Barbie movies. We have Barbie Princess Charm School, and hope you are looking forward to that. And we'll actually be taking a little bit of a break from glimpsing Greta, just kind of getting a few Barbie movies out of the way. But we will be back soon enough to keep talking about her films. Next on the list for glimpsing Greta is Mistress America. Might be a little bit before we get there, but I am committed to keeping doing these, and hopefully we'll be able to get some co-hosts here. It's fun to talk about these anyway, but I do kind of wish I had someone to bounce ideas off of, because these are great films. But yeah, thank you for watching, and see you all next week.